Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I believe Osho, one of the sort of main sort of spiritual New Age kind of people, famous for his love of Rolls Royces if nothing else, but he did say a lot of many great things. One of them was, when you're in love, you do not ask the question about the meaning of life. So when you really feel that you're in love, these questions of deeper meaning, why am I here, what's going on, don't seem to matter quite as much. So there is a sense in which love is tapping into something timeless, something that goes beyond all our explanations, and where you don't need to give a second explanation for it.
Broadly speaking, if you read particularly the developmental psychology of the second half of the 20th century, where love is not always used, but it's about relationships, that's the point. You can sort of discover or discern, broadly speaking, sort of four positions, I think, in relation to our development in terms of relationships. The first three are relatively uncontroversial, but the fourth is the one where the spiritual element becomes explicit, and so would be more controversial in terms of empirical psychology and things, certainly. And the point about these positions is that we tend to come across them through our life, beginning from when we are born, and we negotiate them for the first time through, chronologically you might say, but then also there's a sort of a sense in which once you've gone through one position, it's there for you to access, to negotiate subsequently in life too. So they're synchronic and diachronic, to use technical language. And life tends to go well when you have good access to these different positions. So let me try and say what they are. The first one is broadly narcissistic in character. This is the young newborn child, desperate for its survival, you might say. Survival is the number one priority. And life is so organized for the child that's cared well enough that what it requires is provided for it. It's hungry, and almost as if by magic, you might imagine milk falls onto its tongue. It feels cold, and almost as if by magic, it's suddenly warm. It feels wet, and almost by magic, it's sort of dry again. This leads to some of the characteristics which pop up. For example, omnipotence can pop up in an adult narcissism, when you feel somehow the world should be ordered according to what you require or demand. And the idea is that the young-born child has to negotiate its narcissism, which is sort of good, it's required to survive. It needs to scream to communicate to a parent. But nonetheless, if that's the only mode of love that the child is capable of, it's going to cause it a lot of problems later on. So there's a kind of good narcissism, you might say, when you love yourself enough to get over yourself. You can feel comfortable in your own skin, and often, because this is very early developmentally, it often is a very embodied kind of experience. But to feel comfortable in your own skin, in a way, to love yourself enough so you can see there's more than just yourself in the world. You're not just the center of the universe. So that's the first position. The child perhaps begins to get a sense that it's not the only creature in the universe, whole person in the universe, when it realizes actually that it's dependent upon a parent, probably, mother, probably. I think that this is quite a traumatic experience at first. If you've ever had children, you'll know that sometimes young children, they're hungry, but they refuse to be fed. They won't be comforted. They will hardly be held. They'll kick and scream. You put the blanket over them, they kick it right off again. And one way of imagining what might be going on here is the frustration and the anger, the hatred even, about realizing that you're dependent upon another. You're not as omnipotent, as it were, as you thought you might be. Certainly, if you look at the adult equivalent, you can read that, and you can hear people talk about things in that way. So the idea is it's sort of inferred back. But the good thing is that if you can go through this pain barrier, you can move from the first position, one, the narcissistic dimension, to a dyadic relationship. So this is the second position, which, conveniently enough, is about two people. And life expands as a result. And I think this is one of the reasons why pain is always associated with love, because an expansion, a growth of love, always requires kind of going through quite a traumatic phase I know one of the things which you mentioned when we were talking before is what role will has to play in love. And I don't think you can will yourself to love in a certain way, but what you can do is sort of encourage yourself to go through the trauma in order that a new kind of love might open up. And dyadic love would be the second position. So this is, you know, the young parent in love with their baby, the baby in love with the parents, the ordinary devotion, as Donald Winnicott rather nicely puts it. And then the idea is that this repeats particularly when you first fall in love as an adult. Romantic love is the kind of adult version of this very early infantile experience, when all you want is to have and to hold. It's very possessive, a bit like, again, the parent and child. It's a rather exclusive love, too. Have you ever sat on a train when, you know, two people are canoodling in front of you? It's deeply offensive. And I think it's not offensive because you're a prude about kissing in public. It's offensive because, in effect, they're saying, no one else matters. All that matters is my beloved and me. Spiritually, I think you see this in dyadic sort of religious language or sort of religious feeling. When, for example, you know, all that's important is me and my relationship with Jesus. Or all that's important is me and doing my mindfulness meditation. It's like the whole of your spiritual life, as it were, depends upon owning or possessing this one either capacity or relationship. Now, in a way, there's nothing wrong with that. We all fall in love, but it's limiting again too. And so the idea is that the third position then comes along. And this, in the developmental psychology, is when the young child realizes that mum's not only interested in them, the parent's not only interested in them. There might be a father, there may be her work, there may be siblings. So the idea is that you enter a kind of triangular space now, as it's sometimes called. So there's not just the dyadic, you know, two poles, but there's a triangular third position. It's very painful again to realize that there's not just one person you have to trust, but you have to sort of somehow throw yourself onto others, onto life itself even. Deeply unsettling experience. But of course, if you feel secure enough inside, all those kind of good qualities, then life expands again into this third position. I think it's both an external thing in terms of friendship would be perhaps the characteristic love of this phase, where you don't want to possess your friend, you want to be with your friend, and as it's sometimes put, not gaze into their eyes, but look straight ahead to step into life. So you can still see the triangular three-dimensional kind of notion here. And then religiously, I think that this capacity is reflected in the capacity to, say, critique your otherwise strongly held religious beliefs, to use metaphor, to be happy with aesthetics. You know, you walk into a great building, and it's expansive. It has literally a three-dimensional quality. You don't have to be able to pin it down. You can let your